All right, we have been joined on Zoom by American-based Ghanaian specialist in infectious diseases, Dr. Beth Sewa-Ayi. Gov't, Dr. Sewa-Ayi, thank you very much for making time to speak with us. Now, Gov't, as you heard, is inviting people to start a conversation about living with the virus, seeing it that COVID-19 is going to be here for a while. I'd like to start with you, if you don't mind. What are some of the ways we can adapt life to live with COVID-19?
Well, thank you very much for having me on your program, and thank you and good evening to your audience as well. I think if we're moving into that arena, one of the first things is going to be very good communication, because the Centers for Disease Control in the U.S. also yesterday released a document which I think they've been working on. It's a 60-page document that looks at the various steps in which any lockdown or going back to normal life can be evaluated. And a lot of it is based on risk assessment, so that they're looking at the amount of disease in each community. And that information is going to come from the government themselves, letting us know that maybe in this particular town or district, there's zero transmission. You don't have any cases, and so you can almost continue to lead your lives. Maybe you don't travel here or there, or maybe this particular community, there's a major outbreak in a particular school. And so for that school alone, although every school is in session, they all need to stay at home. So it's going to be a lot of weighing and making sure that every decision is being made right at the point that it's needed to be made. The other thing that we need to seriously consider is, as the Minister of Information was talking, he talked about the global environment. We're not alone. Ghana is just one of. In fact, if you look at the WHO map that looks at the number of cases, it's been colored. There's Americas, Europe, Asia. You can't even see the African color at the bottom. It's like we have like less than 1% of all the cases in the world. So we live in a global environment. We also need to be monitoring what is happening in Togo, what is happening in Burkina Faso, what is happening in Ivory Coast, so that we don't get into the framework of thinking it's just us. And then after we put in all our controls, we import disease like we did between January through March. So it's going to be a lot of risk assessment and very good communication. And I also think we should engage our children very much in this effort.
Okay, and talking about children, I'd like for us to make this as practical as possible. Let's take the schools, for instance. If we're going to have life back as normal, it means the schools would have to reopen. And I'm sure you're aware of the systems we have in Ghana where we have boarding schools. So people are moving from one place that is a hot spot to another place that's not a hotspot. We're bringing all these people together. How do you foresee life in a boarding facility?
It's going to have to dramatically change. A lot of our boarding schools were overcrowded anyway, and we're going to have to find a way of decongesting them. It may mean some schools will go on a shift. Some people may have to be forced to be day students. I'm not sure how it will work, but it will be a real work in progress, literally and also figuratively. It's not going to be easy. So you take the US, for example. Okay, restaurants are open, and then you find that they tell them your tables have to be 6 feet apart. And then they realize that, look, we can operate, but we're not making any money. I mean, if we're not having the tables next to each other, then we're running at a loss. And so they met with the president and said, you know what, just give us money, because this is not going to work. So it will be a trial and error, because really the world has never been this way before in the last 100 years. And so we're going to have to try it. If it doesn't work, we back off. And talking about children, you know, I'm sure you may have heard that this week, even though we thought children were asymptomatic, apparently when they get the infection after about a month or so, they present with this syndrome of involving multiple systems, including their hearts, so that children can get heart attacks. So we're talking about going back to schools at a time when we just discovered that children are in real danger. So it's going to be a real work in progress.
How about the churches? The churches are eager to, have their congregation back.
Yes, it will take a lot of education. Some churches in America are going back. It will take a lot of precautions, a lot of education. And I'll go back to the restaurant example because they're the ones who opened first. They were giving guidelines on how to clean every table, clean frequently. Everybody was putting on their masks. So it will really be a very, very new way of doing things. I think they should also continue their online presence, because I don't think they'll be able to meet as frequently, although everybody's used to going to church on Sunday. So that one we come back away from, but it will have to be a lot of spaces. We can't be sitting like we used to on a bench with everybody snuggled next to each other. And it's not a positive example, but in the very early times of the outbreak, when the churches were told not to meet, there was one pastor in Virginia who he literally said, you know what, God is bigger than this virus, and you can quote me on that. Unfortunately, by the time we were ready to quote him, he had died from COVID-19. His daughter was interviewed on live television. He said they did everything. They had hand sanitizers. They did everything, the spacing, but they still got infected. I don't want to believe somebody went to that church on purpose to defy him, but he caught the virus, within a short time of saying that, and he succumbed to the disease. So I just want us to realize that the risk is real. And when it comes to churches, South Korea's outbreak actually started from a church. One woman infected 1,100 people, and that made up 60 to 70% of South Korea's cases. She went to a church, and the church leader had to apologize. He went on his knees and was telling the whole nation, I am sorry, we continue to meet. So the church would have to be very careful if we reopen and they get back to...
Dr. Ayi, one final question that I have for you is, if you were asked to advise the government of Ghana, how much time would you say we should continue to keep the restrictions before we lift them?
That is $1 million question. This question, anytime you ask a scientist, the answer is always going to be, you don't set time limits for the virus tells you what to do. Because, a month or two ago, when I was asked about what would happen lifting the lockdown, I was very nervous because I know the virus in the US within 5 weeks, it had infected 1 million people. But look, we're 9 to 10 weeks into our epidemic or pandemic, and we're reporting 6,000 cases. Not that it's not a lot, but we would have expected over 1 million. And I've always told people that just like the time of smallpox, when those who had cowpox were not getting smallpox, and so it was the basis for the smallpox vaccine, I'm almost getting to the point of being convinced that in much of Africa, maybe we've been exposed to something that has already built up our immune system so that we have so many asymptomatic cases. So that is the background with which I look at this, that if we were to go by time, it's almost impossible to tell because it did not behave like we expected it to. And so it'll be difficult to come up with a time limit. Because, for example, we thought everything was over, and then we hear that there's a factory with 533 cases. So how do you put a time to that,
All right. Thank you very much. Dr. Bertha Sewa Ayi is an American-based Ghanaian specialist in infectious diseases.